Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back. Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer with you guys. And today I'm going to do literally a 10-15 minute video. I will do my best to keep it at that maximum rather, because I just want to just shoot out some videos that are not 45 minutes in length and 1 hour in length. I'm still going to continue to do those lengthy ones. But anyway, here's a quick sort of overview, if you like, on a really effective way of assessing your 11th house in your birth chart. Now, the lens that I'm using today is through medieval astrology, so it's a medieval lens. And in medieval astrology, in the way I've learnt at least, there's a system where when you are actually assessing the 12 zodiacal houses of the birth chart, there's 3 distinct levels or layers to each single house. So whilst there is still the traditional understanding of what each house represents and the various components, this particular lens has 3 very distinct platforms or levels. So I'm going to be looking at it from that perspective. There is something else that I'm wanting to bring into this as well, which is called triplicity rulers. Now, triplicity rulers are an old system that belongs to the medieval teachings, and the triplicity rulers I'm using are termed Dorotheus. Now, a lot of you will not be familiar with this, and I do appreciate that. So I will do my best to just make a couple of notes underneath this video in terms of where one might be able to locate, or what I might even do is just simply hold this up. So if I hold this up literally now just for a few seconds, you can pause the video, okay, and then you can use this as your little index card reference point for what we're looking at today. That will come later in the later part of the video, which given I've just decided to bring that in, we might actually need more than 10-15 minutes. So let's see how we go. Okay. I've got a couple of chart examples today as well, which is great. I love using chart examples, and I've got some really interesting public figures, one of which is not with us, two rather, that are not with us anymore, but one that is. And we will just quickly look at each of those charts, which will be Bruce Lee, Madonna, as in the singer, and Carl Jung, as in the psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, psychologist, astrologer, therapist. So, look, when you are looking at the 10th house of the birth chart from a traditional Western tropical zodiac point of view, we are looking at the 10th house so that it can inform us of what our life direction is about, what our career path is about, what our vocation is about. A couple of other levels that connect to the 10th house are often connecting to the mother or the father, because the 10th and the 4th house of the birth chart, which is the IC and the MC, are the parental axis of the birth chart. Now, I'm bringing in the 10th because the 10th leads us into the 11th. In other words, whatever you establish through your 10th house, which is your public and social identity, social status, professional status, and so forth, will translate into the 11th house, because the 11th house is the house of one's success and ventures, or success in ventures. What does that mean? That means that everything that you have built and put together through the 10th house will be filtered and experienced through the 11th, in terms of how successful will you be with your career path, your vocation, your life direction really does actually connect to the 11th house. The 11th house is many things. It's dreams and wishes, it's humanitarian causes and connections, groups and friendships, and from a medieval perspective, it's actually considered to be the domain that connects to faith, the domain that connects to friends, which is also the traditional view when we're not using medieval astrology, and as I just said, the success of one's ventures. So these are the three levels that medieval splits this house up into: faith, friends, and the success of one's ventures. And, you know, if you think about all this, friends friends can be quite broad in terms of how we view that. It can be one-on-one, very close personal friendships that we have. It can be group sort of social friends and friendships that we establish. And often the reason the 11th house is very important from that friend sort of level as well is because it is through friendships and connections that we make out in the community that can also assist us in how we basically go forth for our ventures. So the connections that we make can really help us in what we've established in the 10th house, which is just to put it through the medieval lens, the 10th house is work and status, level 1. Level 2 is our leadership skills and abilities, and level 3 is our stability in career. So once we've established that 10th house component and those three different levels, it is the 11th house that then expands what we've actually created in the 10th house through the connections and friends and groups that we make and interact with, through the sense of faith that we have in ourselves and in the bigger picture in life, and our ability to succeed when we venture out, when we have those dreams and wishes and ideals of what we wish to succeed into. So the 11th house is really, really powerful. It's not just your friends and your mates and your groups that you hang out with. It's really got to do with how you succeed in life as well. And it's also the house of the guardian damon, as they call it, which means it's the house of angels. So it's the house where you can feel a sense of protection and connection with angelic beings and angelic realms. So the 11th house has much, much, much more to it than your standard basic interpretation of the 11th house would be identified at through basic astrology. So this is why I decided to do this short video, just to give you guys a little bit more depth and insight from a couple of lenses, one being the traditional or more psychological mainstream view, if you like, and then the other level is the medieval, which is more inclined to be a traditional view, I think, because it comes from the original ancient sort of texts and teachings of ancient astrology. So that's that. So when you're looking at your 11th house, look at it in conjunction of your 10th house in your birth chart, right? So you're looking at the 10th house again, work and status, leadership skills, stability of career, right? So what's in the 10th house? What rules the 10th house? What is a sign on the 10th house cusp? What can you understand through all of that? And then when you move over into the 11th, you are merging and fusing and connecting those two houses as working together, really, because they cannot be separated. They are assisting your path of your career, your path of your ventures and your dreams and your wishes. So keep that in mind when you're looking at the 10th and 11th house. And let's just go to sharing my screen. And let's just have a look at a couple of charts. Now, having a look at Madonna's chart. So this is Madonna, the artist, performer, singer, born on the 16th of August, 1958, 7:05 a.m. Her time of birth is, almost accurate, if not accurate. Born in Bay City, Michigan, so in the United States. Okay, now I'm using the Kosh house system. You can use a different house system if you like. It's entirely up to you, but this is the house system that I'm currently working with and have been working with for some time. Okay, so if you look at Madonna's 11th house, you can see that Cancer is on the 11th house cusp. Okay, so now you look at her 10th house, empty. And this is really important and valuable because sometimes people are under the impression that if a house is empty, that means that part of my life is not happening. It's not important. It's not in tune. It's not connected. It's not activated. It's takes a lesser priority, etc. Well, clearly that's not the case here at all, is it really? And it's not true of anybody, really. There's a number of, you'd have to assess, obviously, a number of different things. But this is just a great example to help you guys see that. We're talking about Madonna, who's, she's a superstar. Whether you like her or not is irrelevant. We're not talking about whether she's your favorite pop star or it doesn't really matter. I actually do really like her. I love her music. I've loved her since I was a kid. I think she's a fantastic performer. Anyway, so perhaps it's another reason why I chose her. But I do try not to be biased and try to remain objective when I'm looking at different charts as well. So I don't always just choose people I like. For instance, I've done videos where I've spoken about serial killers and murderers. Now, they're clearly not people I like. So, there you go. There's an example. I will look at anyone's chart, really. Okay, getting back on track. So Madonna's 10th house is empty, but she's a superstar and a very, very, very successful superstar, right? So if you were to just look at her 10th house and think, wow, how does she become so successful and so popular and so out there in the world and decades, decade after decade after decade of being successful and producing, I don't know how many albums she's produced and, having done hundreds of concerts, etc. Well, here it is. It's in her 11th house. So she has Venus in Leo in the 11th house. Now, Venus in Leo is popularity, right? It's also narcissistic tendencies, but it's also incredibly powerful for creative juice and creative energy. And here's her Venus in Leo in the 11th house. The 11th house, in the way we are assessing it at this point in time, connecting to the success of one's ventures. Now, Leo in Venus in Leo is not necessarily dignified or debilitated in terms of essential dignities and abilities, but Venus in Leo does not do badly at all. Venus in Leo, in fact, does very, very well. It's a very powerful position for Venus, and it's in her 11th house, which connects her to her ventures, her goals, her dreams, her wishes, and how she basically has gone out there and done her thing. And it's Venus. She's an artist. She's a performer. She's a singer. And it's in Leo, and she is a Leo. We know that. But she takes on that dramatic, beautiful power of the energy of Leo in terms of creativity, right? There it is. Now, when you're looking at the 11th house, it's ruled by the moon, and the moon in her chart is in the first house in Virgo, right? Now, esoterically, that's actually a very powerful moon because the moon rules Virgo in esoteric astrology, but that's another level yet again. Point being, though, that the ruler to her 11th house is angular. It's in an angular house. It's in the first house of her birth chart. And it also forms a square to her midheaven, as well as it does to her IC. But in this case, we're interested in the midheaven. So the ruler of the 11th house is angular. It's forming a square to the MC, which is good because it's activating that midheaven part of the chart, the career part, the life direction part, and it means that she's very, very powerful in what she does as well because and the moon as well, the moon rules the masses, right? So the moon squares her midheaven, which is her social public life. So there's a lot of connections we can make here, but without going too much further, I just wanted to show you guys that here's an example of a chart where the 10th house is empty, but we have an incredibly famous artist, and you can see it through her 11th house just by actually looking at what's in the 11th house, what rules the 11th house, which is the moon, and the moon makes an aspect to her midheaven, which is her career, public life, etc., as I already said. Now, what else do we have here? Okay, you could say there is it's a bit wide. Anyway, okay, leave that out for now. Now, the other thing that I wanted to say was, let me just have a quick look at this. So Madonna is a when you are working with this little system here, you will notice that I have the elements on this side, right? Earth, air, fire, and water. And then you will notice I have day, night, and what's called participating. Don't worry about what participating means or stands for. Don't worry about that. But just pay attention to the planets that are in the orders that they're in, the elements that they line up with, and whether they line up with day or night, etc. So my video seems to be operating in a weird sort of way, so I'm hoping this translates through normally when it's filmed and done. Okay, so Madonna, what we want to have a look at when it comes to the triplicity rulers, in looking at the 11th house, it is the third triplicity ruler, as it's called, that governs the 11th house regarding one's ventures and the success of one's ventures, okay? So what we want to see is, first of all, we want to see, okay, it's the water element. So we would go to the water column, okay, which is down there, just down there. And then we would look at, is she born in the day or the night? She's actually born at 7:05 a.m., so that's obviously daytime. And we would go to the what's called diurnal column, okay, diurnal meaning day. And then we would go to the third planet in line, okay, because it's the third triplicity ruler we are wanting to assess in terms of her 11th house, okay, and the third triplicity ruler of water, which is the moon, okay. Can you see? Let's just see. Okay, so there's the moon down there. All right, I'll when I stop sharing my screen, I'll bring this up again and just make it a bit more clearer. But I showed it at the beginning of the video, so you can pause, and what I'd like you to do, if you're really interested in exploring this and understanding it, is just copy this out. Just make your own card, okay? But even if you don't want to use the triplicity rulers, you don't have to. They're an additional component to assessing the different houses, every single house in the birth chart, okay? But even if you weren't to use this, you could still just simply understand that the primary message to this video is that the 11th house connects to the success of one's ventures. A way to understand that with greater depth and detail is to understand which triplicity lord or which triplicity ruler connects to the 11th house. In Madonna's chart, because it's water on the 11th house cusp, she's born in the day, and what we need to do is locate the third planet, because it's the third triplicity ruler of this house that enables us to understand how successful she will be with her ventures. So it's the moon. Okay, now the moon is angular moon. When a planet is angular, meaning first, fourth, seventh, or 10th, these are the four most potent, most powerful, most active, energized parts of the chart. The other houses are just as important in different ways though, okay? But in terms of power and energy being activated out there in the world, or being extremely powerful, we are always going to look at that through the first, fourth, seventh, and 10th houses. So the ruler, the triplicity ruler of Madonna's 11th house, which connects to the success of her ventures, and clearly she's highly successful. As I said, this is not about whether you like her or not. This is just simply assessing the magnitude and volume of her success, which is huge, right? So it's the moon that we look at. Now, the moon doesn't have dignity or debility in Virgo in conventional, traditional psychological astrology. But as I said, in esoteric astrology, her moon rules Virgo. So it's actually quite a powerful moon from an esoteric perspective. But in terms of what it means here in this chart, what we need to understand is that, I mean, we can go further and say, okay, it's next to the part of fortune. It's not quite close enough to be a conjunction, I wouldn't think, but let's just leave that alone. That's another level. just understand that the moon ruling the 11th house and being the third triplicity Lord ruler of what connects to the success of her ventures, the moon is angular. It rules the 11th house. It's square the midheaven, so it has another connection to the career path chart, part of the chart anyway. And that's it. That's it in a nutshell. Very simple, straightforward interpretation of the power of the 11th house in this particular individual's chart. Very strong 11th house with Venus in there anyway, and we've discussed a little bit about what Venus, represents. It's her artistry, really, and just how well she's done at it. But it's that angular moon has really been quite a powerful moon for Madonna in terms of how successful she's been able to be in her life. And then we can go further and say, the moon in Virgo ascendant, she's a health freak, she's a health, just perhaps I shouldn't use the word freak, but she's very, very passionate about health. This is a woman who, from my understanding at least, has never engaged in any type of substances of any sort. She's, right into exercise, yoga, nutrition, health, blah, 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 etc. That's another part of her chart. But anyway, there it is. There's that. Let me just quickly move on because this video is slowly becoming longer. And it's quite hot in here today. Okay. Share. Sorry, guys. What I meant to do is this. I might just go to Bruce Lee because this one's an interesting one. Now, what I'd like to... Well, I don't know if I should bring that in because it's a different house. Let me think about this. Okay. So air, and it's the third one, so it's Jupiter. This one's more complex, and it's complex, I think, mainly because of the nature of Bruce Lee's death, which is still very unclear and, very interesting that he has Neptune in the 10th house, right? But, look, I mean, here we go again. Here's a very powerful example of, this guy's an icon. This guy was, a craftsman, a skillsman, a professional, a very extreme in what he produced and created and did, the perfectionist, really. Incredible intensity and focus in, he was the 1-inch punch man. I've said this before in another video. You look at that punch and you can't actually see it. That's how quick it is. Very, very powerful athlete, sportsman, martial artist, so many things about this guy. And, here we have Mars in Scorpio, Venus in Scorpio. But if you look at the 10th house, here's Neptune, which was, I think, this Neptune, to me, speaks the illusion that's been created around his death in terms of the fact that there's been hiding, masking, deliberately fabricating and creating disillusionment around what I think would be the facts of how he died, which was he was murdered. So Neptune creates this illusion around that. All right, in even to the point of, there was recently some ridiculous show that in America came out where there was some famous doctor who's a professional in autopsies and so forth, and the video actually made me sick to my stomach. I wanted to literally go to the bathroom and throw up. It was just so pathetic and just so degrading to this beautiful icon, this master in his craft. Anyway, I see that as the Neptune in the 10th. Neptune in the 10th is many, many other levels and layers, but I'm just merely speaking to the fact that there's this great illusion around his death and what actually happened, right? And the lies and deception. Because Neptune can be lies and deception as well, okay, when it's not operating at that transcendental level, at its ultimate level of truth and purity and divine oneness. So, but if you look at his 11th house, this is the success of his ventures. Now, he had Mars in Scorpio, which is in rulership. You can't have a stronger Mars than Mars in Scorpio. Mars rules Scorpio and Aries, but I think it does a lot better in Scorpio than it does in Aries for a number of different reasons. But I've done a video on this and I've discussed it. So, you know, just if you're interested in understanding Mars in its co-ruled signs, watch that video. I talk about that further. But just looking at Mars in Scorpio in its highest sort of dignity, it's and it describes, you know, the success in his ventures, definitely. But on the other hand, what we need to look at is well, actually, before I go there, the 11th house describes the success of what he did, what he achieved. There are other things in his chart, though, that do describe how his life was ended quite early as well. But just sticking to the success of his ventures, well, it's Mars in Scorpio. Now, the Venus in Scorpio, which is in detriment, you know, we could include in the fact that his successes were cut short, you could say, because Venus in Scorpio is in its detriment. Okay, so it doesn't do as well as Venus would like to. I mean, there's all these other levels to Venus and Scorpio with passion and intensity and mystery and, you know, very intense feelings and the world of psychology, and, you know, there's all these wonderful components to it. But at the end of the day, Venus in Scorpio is in its detriment, and that will show up in one way or another. So the ruler to the 11th house, which connects to the triplicity rulers, and the third triplicity ruler connecting to Bruce Lee's 11th house, which is Libra, an air sign. The third triplicity ruler, in the case of air being born during the day, happens to be the planet Jupiter, right? Now, when you look at this card later, you will see what I've just said is 100% correct, because we're looking at air, we're looking at day, and we're looking at the third triplicity ruler, okay, which happens to be Jupiter. Now, Jupiter is very strongly placed in this man's chart. It's in the 5th house, which is called a succeedent house, which is quite a powerful house. And Jupiter is in Taurus, and it's actually forming an opposition to Mars as well. So this opposition connecting to Mars draws more of that energy into the 11th house, which is all about how successful he was in his ventures. So what I'm trying to say is that we can identify the success of this man's ventures, because he was successful for the 32, 33 years that he was alive, very successful, as a matter of fact, which is one of the reasons his life was taken. But you can see from this 11th house the successes that show up, you know, Mars in rulership in Scorpio in the 11th house, and Jupiter in Taurus is a happy Jupiter as well, okay? And in the 5th house, it's quite happy too, which is the house of creativity and creative expression, which came through in his craft and his artistry through the Mars in Scorpio, with that incredible intensity, staying power, and ability to transform. Pretty much, he transformed the martial arts culture in terms of the traditional ancient system that was in place for thousands of years, and he came out teaching it in a slightly different way and teaching it to the West, which was a big no-no in the Chinese culture, which is part of why his life was cut short as well. Anyway, that's a whole other level, a whole other story. But just one final thing I want to leave you guys with, and this is quite extraordinary. In medieval astrology, the 12th house, now we're going on to another house, but I'm not going to unpack this whole thing, but I just want to show you one thing, because this is really, really, really fascinating and scary, but fascinating. The 12th house in medieval astrology, the first layer, remember I said each house has 3 layers. Well, the first layer in medieval astrology of this 12th house belonging to the chart of Bruce Lee, the first layer connects to enemies, right? The enemies that we have. Now, we are assessing water during the day, and we are assessing the first ruler of water. Now, the first ruler of water in a day chart, in terms of triplicity rulers, happens to be Venus. Now, look at Bruce Lee's Venus. What did I say about his Venus a few minutes ago? I said that whilst Venus has all these other components to her in the sign of Scorpio, she's in detriment in Scorpio. So when a planet is in detriment, it's, in short, it can really screw things up for you, all right? It can work against you. And Venus is the planet that connects to the part of his chart that speaks to hidden enemies. And look at Venus in Scorpio, which is all about hidden stuff as well, and Venus in detriment. So Venus rules that part of his chart connecting to hidden enemies, which he was killed, you know, by hidden enemies. There it is there. Venus in Scorpio rules that part of his chart. Now, if Venus was in Libra or in Taurus, and she wasn't conjunct Mars as well, then we probably wouldn't have the result that we've had. But that's not what we have. We have Venus in Scorpio in detriment, conjunct Mars ruling the part of his chart that connects to hidden enemies. So anyway, just wanted to throw that one in because that's just freaking mind-blowing, I think. And just a very powerful example of medieval astrology. So for those of you that are interested in exploring your hidden enemies, what you would look at is that you would look at what element do you have on the 12th house cusp. Do you have fire, air, earth, or water? So you would first determine which element you have. Then you would determine whether you are a day birth or a night birth, right? So in the case of Bruce Lee, what we had was we had water and we had day. So water and a day birth equates to Venus as the first triplicity ruler of the 12th house, which is what we're assessing. If you want to know who your enemies are, look at the first triplicity ruler of your 12th house and follow the guidelines, which is it a fire, air, earth, or water element? And are you a day or a night birth? Okay. Hopefully that's clear. If it's not, shoot me a question and I'll clarify things further underneath this email. You may not want to use this system anyway. You may. I personally find this system really quite remarkable, actually, in terms of what it can reveal. But just going back to the 11th house, the 10th house and the 11th house, when you're looking at the 11th house, the success you gain out of the 11th house is defined by, as I said, the third triplicity ruler of that house, or you can just, or in addition, you look at the ruler of the 11th house and the shape of that. So what rules your 11th house? What planet is it? What sign is it in? What house is it in? What aspects does it have? Then look to planets in the 11th house, because they too will describe what's going to assist or hinder the success in your life, the success of your ventures. And you would also look to the 10th house to see what's happening with that. Now, if there's nothing in there, like there wasn't with Madonna, look to the sign on the 10th house cusp, locate the ruler of that. Are there any planets forming an aspect to your MC, square or conjunction? So these are all very important steps that you need to take into account when you're assessing the 11th house. But you must really look at the 10th house as well. But the 10th house is integrating, is fusing into that 11th house. right? So they're really working together essentially. But the final analysis of the 11th house is in the 11th house or through the 11th house. So, you know, look, if you had Saturn in the 11th house, you know, that would be a pretty challenging pathway to succeeding in your ventures. But, you know, look, if you had Saturn in rulership, then there's promise there. It just would mean that you'd have to work pretty hard. So each planet would describe different ways, different pathways, different energy, you know, outlets or points in terms of how you access that energy and how you approach your success in the world out there and what you're trying to achieve. You know, if it was Saturn, you might also just be very cautious, and it might take years and years and years, but you might get there. You know, if it's anyway, every single planet would mean different things, but there's just a few tips for you to start considering the 11th house from a different perspective or understanding, perhaps to the one you have now. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching, and see you guys soon with the March update. Just wanted to do this quick video for today. Hope you enjoyed the Chiron in Aries. I'm thinking of doing a part 2 to that. There's just a bit more I'd like to say. And thanks for your beautiful comments and your questions, and thanks to new subscribers, and thanks to my beautiful, you know, subscribers who have been with me for a while. And much love and blessings to all. See you soon. Bye.